The Echo of a Stolen Childhood. Chapter 1, The Whispers of a Past Life. May 2025. The afternoon sun, filtered through the ancient oaks of Asheville, North Carolina, cast dappled patterns across my living room. I am Margaret, 78 years old. My hands, though marked by age, still remember the practiced care of a nurse. My life, now quiet and gentle, revolves around my garden and the occasional visits from my daughter, Emily. Emily. My heart swells with love and a familiar, persistent ache of guilt when I think of her. She is 55 now, a brilliant, successful mystery novelist with a mind like a steel trap. Her intuition, her ability to piece together fragments of information, has always both filled me with pride and stirred a deep, cold fear in my stomach. A fear of a truth long buried. She was here today, sitting across from me at the dinner table, a half-eaten plate of my famous pot roast forgotten in front of her. Her eyes, usually sparkling with wit, were distant, thoughtful. She had been working on a new novel, a complex case involving child abductions. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I have this feeling, a persistent, nagging feeling, that I was kidnapped." The fork clattered from my hand, hitting the ceramic plate with a sharp, sickening sound. My blood ran cold. My carefully constructed world, built on decades of silence and a desperate, fragile love, began to crumble. Emily continued, oblivious to my terror. "It's not a full memory, not really. More like fragments, shards of a dream, a different house, different faces, a sense of fear, of being taken, and voices. Voices I don't recognize. They don't fit into my childhood with you, Mom. They just don't fit." She always had that. A vivid imagination, a mind that saw connections where others saw none. I always encouraged it. Her stories, her daydreams, never dreaming they were echoes of a different life. "Emily, darling," I stammered, my voice thin. "What are you talking about? You've always been with me, since you were a baby. It's just your new book, darling. It's getting into your head." My voice trembled. I reached for her hand, my touch clammy. She pulled back gently, her gaze piercing. "No, Mom, it's different this time. It feels real. I see a little girl running, hiding, and a large man, and a woman crying, and a distinct smell, like the ocean. And I've never even been to the ocean until you took me when I was 7. The ocean, a toy lighthouse, a lullaby I never sang. These were the things that often haunted her dreams. I always dismissed them. Now they were a tightening noose around my heart. The truth, the awful truth. I had lived with it for 53 years. A secret, a lie. A desperate, selfish act born of unimaginable grief. In 1972, I had lost my own baby, stillborn. My world shattered. The hospital, the empty nursery, the silent house. The pain was unbearable. A doctor, a friend of a friend, had whispered about a broker, someone who could connect desperate parents with unwanted children. It was shadowy, illegal. But I was desperate, blinded by sorrow. I wanted a baby, my baby. And then Emily came, small, quiet, with those impossibly large, trusting eyes. She was just a year old. They told me her parents were unfit, that she was abandoned. I asked no questions. I signed no formal papers. It was a transaction, a desperate, silent exchange, and she was mine. I loved her instantly, fiercely. My guilt was a constant companion, but my love for her dwarfed it. I pushed the truth down, deep down. Now it was clawing its way back up, through Emily, through her sharp, intelligent mind, through her relentless pursuit of truth. My secret, my lie, it was about to be exposed. The quiet peace of my life was about to shatter, and I was terrified. Terrified of losing her, terrified of the truth, but most of all, terrified of what I had done. The echo of a stolen childhood. It was finally, inevitably, returning. Chapter 2. The Threads of Memory. Emily's declaration hung in the air between us like a physical weight. Her questions, her keen observations were like scalpels, peeling back the layers of my carefully constructed reality. She began her own investigation, as she called it, with the focused intensity of a detective on a fresh lead. She started writing down her fragments. The smell of stale cigarettes and something sweet, like old candy. A bright yellow kitchen. A loud bang, like a door slamming. A woman's scream, and that recurring image, a tall, imposing man. I tried to distract her, to dismiss her. "Oh, Emily, that's just your creative mind running wild. You're writing a book, remember? Your dreams are blurring with your work." But my voice was too strained, my eyes too quick to avert hers. She noticed. She always noticed. "Mom," she said one afternoon, her voice quiet but firm. "The adoption papers. Can I see them?" My heart plummeted. The papers. I had hidden them so carefully, in a locked box in the attic. They were so sparse, so incomplete. No real names, no agency addresses that were legitimate. Just vague statements about circumstances and abandonment. "Darling," I stammered, they're old, buried somewhere. I'm not even sure where they are, and they're just formal documents. Boring." Her gaze was unwavering. "I'd still like to see them." The next day, with trembling hands, I retrieved the box. The yellowed papers felt thin, fragile, like dry leaves. She read them, her brow furrowed. "There's so little here, Mom. No birth certificate, no medical history from before I was 1, no details about the agency, and this attorney's office is just a P.O. box address." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a dawning suspicion. "This isn't a normal adoption, is it, Mom?" I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "It was a private adoption, darling, very confidential. A desperate, feeble lie." She didn't press, but her silence was deafening. She began to focus on the objects from her early childhood. A small, worn stuffed rabbit she always slept with, a faded wooden toy train, and then a doll, a little rag doll with button eyes and yarn hair, dressed in a surprisingly well-preserved hand-stitched dress. She had always kept it. "This doll," Emily mused, turning it over in her hands. "I remember it, vaguely. It feels older than the others, like it came from somewhere else." She pointed to a tiny, almost invisible embroidery on the doll's arm. "Look, Mom, initials, SB." My mind raced. SB? Not my name. Not Emily's. What did it mean? A new thread in the tapestry of her forgotten past. "And a date," she added, her finger tracing the tiny stitches. 1970. 2 years before I adopted her. My blood ran cold. This doll, it had been with her, from her real home. Emily, with her detective's mind, was now fully unleashed. She told me she was going to contact a retired detective she knew, a man named James. He had worked on cold cases for years. He'd be able to tell her if these fragments of memory, these scant documents, these embroidered initials meant anything. The name, Detective James, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. A real detective, a real investigation. My carefully constructed world was about to be laid bare. The fear was agonizing, the guilt a suffocating blanket. I was a kind woman, a loving mother, but I had built my happiness on a foundation of a child's stolen past. And now that past was rising, demanding to be seen. Chapter 3: Detective James and the Ghost of 71. Emily contacted Detective James. He was a man in his late 60s, with a kind, weathered face and sharp, observant eyes that missed nothing. He was a legend in the regional cold case circuit, known for his persistence and his uncanny ability to connect seemingly unrelated facts. I knew him vaguely from the community, a quiet, respected figure. Emily laid out her story for him. The fragments of memory, the sparse adoption papers, the rag doll with the SB 1970 initials. I sat there, trying to maintain a facade of calm curiosity, but inside I was a coiled spring of anxiety. James listened, his expression neutral, occasionally scribbling notes in a small pad. He asked Emily about the specific smell of the ocean she recalled and the toy lighthouse. He asked about the tall man, the woman crying. Emily described them as best she could, vague figures from a distant fog. The 1970s, James mused, leaning back in his chair. A lot of child abductions back then. Many went unsolved. Sometimes by a broker who arranged illegal adoptions. Sometimes by family members. He looked at Emily, his gaze softening. It's a long shot, Emily. Many cases, many children, but I can look into it. The initials are a good lead, and the date. He promised to check his old files, specifically for child abduction cases around 1970 to 1972. My stomach churned. This was it. The countdown had begun. A few days later, Detective James called Emily. His voice was grim. Emily, he began, I found something. A case from Atlanta, Georgia, 1971. A missing child. A girl, approximately 1 year old at the time. Her name was Emily. Emily Blake. My breath caught in my throat. Emily Blake. The name echoed in my mind. Her parents. James continued. Sarah and Thomas Blake. The child was reported missing from their home. A quiet suburban street. No forced entry. The mother, Sarah Blake, was devastated. She reported seeing a tall man leaving their house, but couldn't identify him. The father, Thomas Blake, disappeared a few days later, never seen again. The case went cold. It was heavily investigated for a time, but nothing. SB, Sarah Blake, the initials on the doll. The pieces were falling into place chillingly. My Emily. Her real name, her real mother, her real life, stolen. I watched Emily's face as James delivered the news. Her eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief, then a dawning horror. A deep, profound sadness. She wasn't just connecting fragments anymore. She was connecting with a stolen identity, a stolen life, her own. When she hung up, she looked at me, her gaze piercing. Mom, she said, her voice strained. Did you know? My carefully constructed defenses crumbled. My voice cracked. Emily, oh, my darling girl, I didn't know it was like this, not exactly. Tears streamed down my face. The dam had broken. The guilt, held captive for 53 years, surged forth, overwhelming me. I was so lost, so broken, after I lost my own baby. I was desperate for a child. A broker, he found me. He told me you were abandoned, unwanted. He promised me a baby, my baby. I never asked questions. I was too afraid, too selfish. I loved you so much. I couldn't bear to be without you. Emily stared at me, her face a mask of shock and pain. "You mean you bought me? From a broker? You knew it wasn't legal?" "I knew it wasn't right," I confessed, sobbing now, the words tumbling out. "But I didn't know you were kidnapped. I swear it, Emily. I swear I didn't know your parents were looking for you. I thought you were just alone, unwanted." The confession hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain, with decades of deceit. Emily walked over to me, her hand hesitantly touching my shoulder. Her touch, usually so warm, now felt cool, distant. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet, "we need to find Sarah Blake." My heart ached. The moment of truth, the confrontation with the past. The woman whose child I had unknowingly, desperately stolen. I had lived in fear of this day, and now it was here. The real reckoning was about to begin. Chapter 4: The Unbroken Thread. Detective James, now fully invested in the case, worked diligently. He used his old connections, his vast network of retired officers, to track down Sarah Blake. It wasn't easy. 44 years was a long time. Lives change, people move on. But Sarah Blake, he found, had never moved on. She had become an activist for missing children, a tireless advocate, her life a desperate, endless search for her own lost daughter. Her address was in Atlanta, a quiet, tree-lined street, much like the one Emily remembered from her fragments. The call to Sarah Blake was perhaps the hardest moment of my life. Emily made it, her hand shaking as she dialed the number James had provided. I sat beside her, my own hands clasped tightly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello?" A woman's voice, older, weary, but with an underlying current of resilience. "Mrs. Blake," Emily began, her voice trembling. "My name is Emily, Emily Margaret Holloway." She paused, then took a deep breath. I believe I might be your daughter, Emily Blake." Silence, a long, agonizing silence. Then a sharp, choked gasp. My Emily, after all this time?" Sarah's voice broke. Emily confirmed. She explained about her memories, about the doll, about Detective James's findings. She held the phone away from her ear slightly, so I could hear the sobs that racked Sarah Blake's voice. Sobs of grief, of disbelief, of raw, overwhelming joy. We arranged to meet the next day in Atlanta. The drive felt endless, every mile a step closer to a confrontation I had dreaded for 53 years. A meeting between the woman who had unknowingly raised a stolen child and the woman whose child had been stolen. Sarah Blake. She was frail, her hair white, her face etched with years of sorrow and unrelenting hope. But her eyes were bright, fierce, filled with a burning intensity. She looked exactly like Emily's childhood memories, the face of the woman who cried. When Emily walked into the room, Sarah gasped, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "My baby," she whispered, her arms outstretched. They embraced, a long, tearful embrace, a reunion decades in the making. The air was thick with the weight of lost time, but also with an undeniable, powerful bond. Sarah pulled away, her hands cupping Emily's face. "Your eyes," she whispered, "just like your father's, and your smile. Oh, my Emily, my beautiful girl." She led us to a room, her study, filled with files, posters of missing children, and then she showed us old photo albums, black and white, sepia-toned, pictures of a younger Sarah Blake and a young man, handsome with intense eyes, Thomas Blake, Emily's biological father. And then Pictures of a baby, a smiling, bright-eyed infant. Emily, Emily Blake. The same nose, the same set of the jaw, the same hint of a smile. The photographs were irrefutable. My Emily, her Emily. I never gave up, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Every day, every single day, I searched. I prayed. I wrote letters. I spoke to anyone who would listen. I knew you were out there. I knew it. She showed Emily a worn, faded baby blanket. This was yours. I always kept it. Always. Emily reached into her bag. She pulled out the rag doll, the one with the SB 1970 initials. Sarah's eyes widened. My doll. I made that for you, my sweet. SB, Sarah Blake. Oh, my little one. You kept it. Tears flowed freely now. Tears of profound understanding. The doll, the unbroken thread, the silent testament to a mother's love, reaching across decades. My Thomas, Sarah then explained, her voice hardening slightly. Your father, he was a good man, Emily, but he had problems. Debts, gambling. He got involved with bad people. I think he was part of it. The abduction. He disappeared right after you did. He must have been involved with that broker. My Thomas, he loved you, but he was weak and desperate. Thomas Blake had never been found, the ultimate price for his choices. The pieces now fit perfectly. The tall man Emily vaguely recalled, the woman crying. It was her mother, her biological mother. Sarah, the broker, the desperation. It was all real. It was her story, a stolen childhood, but also the childhood filled with love, my love. And now, the promise of a fuller, richer truth. Chapter 5, 2 mothers, 1 daughter. The air in Sarah Blake's living room, once heavy with the weight of decades of loss, now shimmered with an almost unbearable lightness. The truth, raw and painful, had finally emerged. My Emily, her Emily, was no longer a ghost of the past, but a living, breathing reality, standing between 2 mothers, each bearing a unique claim to her heart. Sarah, Emily's biological mother, recounted the terror of that day in 1971. The brief moment she left baby Emily in her crib, stepping out to the garden. The unsettling silence when she returned. The open window. The frantic search. The agonizing years that followed, marked by an unyielding hope and a deep, gnawing grief. She showed us newspaper clippings, faded and brittle, detailing the abduction. Her own youthful face, etched with despair, stared out from the grainy photographs. Then it was my turn, my confession, my own loss. The stillborn baby in 1972. The abyss of grief. The whisper of the broker from a trusted but misguided source. My desperation to fill the emptiness. The hasty illicit transaction. My unwavering belief, born of my own broken heart, that Emily was an unwanted child needing a home. I swear, Sarah, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face, reaching out to Emily's birth mother. I never knew she was stolen. I never knew you were searching. I loved her so much. From the moment I saw her, I loved her. Sarah Blake looked at me, her eyes, though weary, filled with an unexpected compassion. She saw my pain. She understood the depth of my grief, the desperate act of a woman shattered by loss. She extended her hand to me. Margaret, she said, her voice soft, I see your heart, and I see her. You raised my daughter. You loved her. You gave her a good life. That counts for something. For everything. Emily stood between us, her hand in mine, her other hand in Sarah's. 2 mothers, 1 daughter. The bond was undeniable, complex, and profoundly powerful. Detective James, true to his word, meticulously compiled all the evidence: the old files, Emily's memories, my confession, Sarah's testimony. It was enough to definitively close the cold case of Emily Blake's abduction. The broker was long gone, his network disbanded, his shadowy past lost to time. Thomas Blake, Emily's biological father, remained a mystery, his fate unknown, his complicity an unspoken burden. Chapter 6: The Unfolding Canvas of Life. The revelations, though agonizing, brought an unprecedented sense of peace. For Emily, the fragments of her childhood finally coalesced into a complete, if painful, narrative. The smell of the ocean, the toy lighthouse, these were not random dreams, but echoes of her earliest home in Atlanta, a life she never knew, a family she never remembered. The tall man, the crying woman, her biological parents, Thomas and Sarah. For me, Margaret, the decades of guilt began to lift. The secret, so heavy and suffocating, was finally exposed and met not with condemnation, but with understanding and even compassion. Sarah Blake, the woman whose child I had unknowingly raised, extended an olive branch, acknowledging the love I had poured into Emily. This was not a betrayal, but an expansion of love. For Sarah Blake, the unyielding search finally ended. The daughter she had mourned for 44 years was found. Not a ghost, but a vibrant, intelligent woman who shared her passion for truth and justice. Emily, with her novelist's mind, absorbed it all: the complexities of human nature, the devastating impact of grief, the desperate choices made in the throes of sorrow. She realized that while she had been stolen, she had also been loved, profoundly, by two mothers. In two very different circumstances, she began to write her new book, not a fictional mystery, but her own true story, a memoir. She meticulously detailed her journey of discovery, the fragmented memories, the painstaking investigation, the emotional reunions. She wanted to share her story, not just for herself, but for other children who might carry the echoes of a stolen past, and for the parents who never gave up hope. Her detective skills, honed over years of crafting fiction, now served a higher purpose, shedding light on the silent suffering of missing children and the hidden realities of illegal adoptions. We all healed slowly together. Emily continued to live in Asheville, but her visits to Atlanta became frequent. She developed a profound relationship with Sarah, learning about her biological family, her heritage, the roots of her identity. And she remained my daughter, my beloved Emily. Our bond, though tested by the truth, ultimately deepened, cemented by honest love and forgiveness. The two mothers, once separated by a devastating secret, now shared a daughter. They found a unique friendship, bonded by their shared love for Emily, their shared pain, and their shared capacity for compassion. They met often, spoke for hours, piecing together the tapestry of Emily's life, filling in the gaps, embracing the complexities. The house in Asheville, once a silent witness to a hidden truth, now hummed with a newfound peace. The garden, once tended by a woman burdened by guilt, now flourished under the sun of forgiveness. Emily's book, when it was published, became the sensation. It brought awareness to the plight of missing children and offered solace to families still searching. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of truth, and to the enduring, unwavering strength of a mother's love. My life, Margaret, in its final years, was no longer haunted by shadows. It was filled with light, the peace I had longed for, the absolution I had never dared to pray for, had finally arrived. My daughter, The beautiful stolen child was finally whole, and in her wholeness, she had made us all whole. The echo of a stolen childhood had finally found its true, loving home.